Thanks to our virtual First UU choir for that stirring music. The 2020 Ozarks Pride Fest was scheduled to happen yesterday here in Springfield. In the past, this event has drawn 4,000 people from a four-state area. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, this year's Ozarks Pride Fest was canceled. And I believe that our church was the first one to staff a booth at Pride Fest years ago. But in the spirit of pride, our service today is focused on what it means to be a truly welcoming congregation and how we plan to get there. Scoop Peary was one of our members who initially helped First UU achieve welcoming congregation status with the Unitarian Universalist Association when we obtained certification in 1998. Scoop has agreed to share with us his experiences with Welcome during his lifetime and specifically as a Unitarian Universalist.
My name is David Scoop Peary. My family and I joined the Unitarian Church in 1958, my sophomore year of high school, after moving from Columbia to Portland, Oregon. During my 79 plus years of life, I've been in the space of many groups. Some groups you are thrust into, like schools, and some groups you choose to join. Generally, if enough people make you feel unwelcome in a group of choice, you either fight on or gain acceptance, or you leave the group. I generally choose, when I can, groups of people who have similar interests that I enjoy being with. Most of these groups have a program that's not sexually oriented, and I've joined a lot of groups in which the main interest just doesn't revolve around sex. For many younger years, I didn't consider myself gay. I had the same interest outside of sex as the many boys and men in my group. I kind of realized I had a sexual preference different from my friends, but I believed that I'd grow out of it. I consider my interests the same as other males outside the bedroom and like the same sports and other activities. And so I guess on the pronoun bit, I would be male gender pronouns. So I had dates with girls, and I engaged in social activities the same as my friends. I was in my 30s when I realized I had gay tendencies that weren't going to go away, and I had to deal with them. Yet some of the tendencies must have bothered people in some groups who held me at arm's length, and they did not invite me to be a part of their circle or social activities. This bothered me, and I dealt with it by joining those who were accepting and avoiding those who were not. I knew groups would not accept the openly gay person. Life began to change in my early 30s. I fell in love and fell out and had a heartache, and it led to some counseling with the University of Missouri counselor over my gayness, and helped a great deal when I got a progressive counselor. I moved from central Missouri to Kansas City and gradually opened up more there, although I stayed straight in my work life throughout my career. Before I moved to Kansas City, I was in a cultural action social group, and this is while I was in Kansas City too, called the Fool Killer. Now Cross Currents, by the way, who consider themselves very liberal and open. Though many suspected my tendencies, I formally came out to them during an instant there. No one tried to kick me out of the organization after, and most intellectually accepted me, but you could tell it put a strain on some of the relationships. Occasionally, some misappropriate things would come up out at a party after some drinks and things like that, but I felt others in the group didn't want to deal with it at all. That was okay. Others were supportive of me and helped me during the hard mental times that came up occasionally. Some were cordial, but kept me at some distance. I was also an active person in the Democratic Party there and in organized labor. My job was labor editor, and I kept these areas outside, though, of my social realm. All Souls, Kansas City, and Church, Unitarian Universalist Church in Kansas City was another organization I was active in. It was an influence when I was not too busy as a newspaper editor 25 miles away. The humanist oriented church was trying hard to socially be welcoming and was proud that they formed the first UUA official and welcoming congregation in Missouri. By the way, Springfield was the second one, 9 or 10 years later in Missouri. So it was inappropriate for them, being such, to treat GLB and later GLBT members differently. Still, sometimes one felt there's a certain distance between the strong family-oriented members and members of the other family, quote unquote. When I moved to Springfield, I decided to come out farther and tried not to hide my gayness. I didn't flout it either. I found members at this church either don't care about one's sexuality or they accepted it. After attending certain sessions of the UUA General Assembly in Boston around 2002, I found out about the GLBT type organizations within the UUA and about becoming a welcoming congregation. I brought the news home here and the paperwork and all that and the recommendations, and was surprised at the almost universal positive reaction here. But some of the reaction was from members, why do we have to be labeled as welcoming? We already are. Why go through all the problems? Let's go ahead with it though, if you want to. Why shouldn't we? It won't bother me. Go ahead and form whatever groups and committees you want to. I'm in favor of you becoming a comfortable part of this church and so forth and so forth. We did go ahead and succeeded, and I believe became officially welcoming around 2004. The welcoming committee later died off because it felt we didn't need it, and other things came up. There was a social group of GLBT people and supporters who were in existence until fairly recently. We have had congregational presidents and board members and so forth who are GLBT, and sexuality was not a controversy. There are members who are not interested in GLBT activities, but who imply, I won't interfere with you if you don't bother me, involve me in it. Now that we have been asked to update our education on welcoming and to dig deeper into the cultural problems that perpetuate problems for GLBT in the community. There's a UUA curriculum on the topic. I personally am not clear what all is in there and what we need, but this will be interesting to see how it affects our congregation, what actions we take. My name is Dave.
I'm Laura Parsons. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a member of the Welcoming Congregation Committee. One of the UUA's requirements for First UU's annual LGBTQ+ welcoming renewal process is for the congregation to complete a welcoming congregation module approved by the UUA. Earlier this year, the board approved the purchase of the Trans Inclusion and Congregations curriculum that was created by the Transforming Hearts Collective. This is an online 6-session course that each of us now has access to on our own schedule for as long as the course exists. This means that even after you've completed a session or the entire course, you'll be able to return to any part of it whenever you'd like to, or check out some of the optional resource materials that you may not have had time for earlier. This is a very user-friendly course. There are closed captions available and written transcripts of each of the video sessions that are also available to follow along as you watch if those would be helpful. You can expect to receive an email next week giving you more information about how to access the course online yourself. This trans inclusion course is very thoughtfully put together and well presented. It helped me understand some of the lived experiences of people in the LGBTQ plus community more fully and more emotionally compared to my previous relatively limited awareness. I definitely learned quite a bit. I also found many of the resource materials that come with each course session to be worthwhile and helpful to broaden my perspective. Much of the foundation of the course is built around several of the writings of Martin Luther King, Jr., and his vision of beloved community. This is more about developing our relationships than about expanding just our knowledge. It means being like-hearted, not necessarily like-minded. How do we actually get to know each other? How do we actually work for liberation for ourselves and each other? How do we get back into right relationship? It's a spiritual practice that can potentially transform our culture. The board and the Welcoming Congregation Committee encourage everyone in our church community to complete this curriculum, if possible, by the end of 2020. You know, many of us at this moment may be feeling more cooped up at home than we like, and we're frustrated or anxious or bored. I highly recommend this course as an opportunity and an invitation to use this time to experience being in the world in a different way, approaching new experiences with openness of heart, mind, and spirit. I think each of us would benefit from this course as individuals, but I also think that we'll benefit significantly as a church community. I urge all of you to take advantage of it. And now, 3 board members who have also completed this course will share how the trans inclusion course deepened their understandings of welcome.
Really interesting.
Him pronouns. I serve on. My name is Bob Eccles. I use he, him pronouns. I serve on the board as facilities trustee. I grew up in Southwest Wisconsin, followed by a career in the military. In my early 40s, my environment was principally conservative. Down the road, I became a Unitarian Universalist, and my eyes were open to better appreciating people for who they are and not the label put on them by those that might wish to oppress. And this was reinforced through the years by testimonies and stories of struggle where gays and transgender individuals had to endure and overcome these struggles with first their families and then with the society in general. As a board member, I was asked to take the course on transgender inclusion in congregations, and I thought, okay. Well, I was very pleasantly surprised that I learned a whole lot about the trans community and actually learned about myself. It was a good exercise for an introspective assessment of my values and how they stacked up against UU principles. My takeaway is centered around the question of welcoming. Are we a welcoming community? Well, at first blush, we think, well, of course we are. We're nice. We're pretty pleasant people, you know? But it goes much deeper than that, I learned. And so I resolved to be a better ambassador and engage in visitors and others in what has been highlighted to me in this course. So I challenge you to take the course on transgender inclusion in congregations and See if there's some self-improvement that might be right for you. Take the course. It's well worth it.
Hi, I'm Sherry Buchanan. I use she, her pronouns. One of the most valuable courses I took during my doctoral studies was human sexuality. This course was especially important as a foundation for helping others during subsequent years of practice as a psychologist. I continued to read, to attend seminars, and to learn from my clients and friends about the complexities and challenges connected to sexuality and gender issues. Even though I stopped practicing several years ago, I have kept fairly well informed about new things we've learned, especially about those who do not fit misconceived notions about sexual correctness. And I have cheered on the cultural shifts which have given somewhat more rights and freedoms to LGBTQ people. But participating in this trans inclusion class has proved to me that I still have a lot to learn. It's also reminded me that this is about a lot more than just having a good knowledge base, and that our knowledge base must come through relationships as well as book learning. We must also seek to understand with our hearts as well as our minds. As UUs, we do not all need to agree about sexuality, have the same opinions or knowledge base in order to be inclusive. But as they put it in the sessions, we don't need to be like-minded, but we do need to be like-hearted. I recommend this course as a way for our congregation to become more informed, but especially more like-hearted. The course can also teach us the difference between being welcoming and being radically inclusive, and give us some tools for moving in a more inclusive direction. As they say in the classes, if we work on this, we can achieve the difference between saying we are a congregation that welcomes gender and sexuality diversity and being able to say that we are people of many genders and sexualities, and gender diversity is sacred.
I'm Colleen Apple. My pronouns are she and her. I'll blame it on Zoom fatigue. I slogged through the first 4 sessions of the course, but in the 5th session, I became completely engaged. The 5th session talks about culture, how we do church, and how UU culture can clash with trans and other marginalized cultures. We who are old, white, straight, and longtime members are comfortable with the standards, practices, and norms of First UU. We know that coffee is extremely important to the way we function, and joys and concerns will be a part of every service. But 90% of church culture lies below the surface, and we rarely speak of it, which means that new people to our church are left to navigate the culture on their own. When we fail to address this submerged region where UU culture is at odds with trans culture, we lose the very people we are excited to have as first-time visitors. I'm going to address this culture clash with 3 First UU examples. Picture an iceberg. Above the water's surface, there are visible symbols including flags and name tags and chalices that we find easy to talk about and use. Now envision the monstrous iceberg below the surface. That's where, in UU culture, the hierarchy of leadership resides. First UU is governed by a rigid organizational structure. In trans and other marginalized cultures, leadership comes from the margins, the people impacted by the issues. This tension is currently playing out in the Social Action Committee. The new Social Action Chair also organizes for Springfield Tenants Unite, a group that needs to operate with urgency outside the usual norms. I'm made anxious by the tension between "this is the way we do things" and "it's time for a complete upheaval." I've been hoarding power and resources. Am I willing to share them? Last week, I delivered Soulful Home Packets, which are monthly packages of religious education materials to families who have at one time had contact with First UU. A total of 24 packets were delivered. Why aren't we seeing those 24 families in church? The iceberg model shows UU culture to be adult-centric, nuclear family, hyper-intellectual, and financially secure. None of us would intentionally exclude the child-centric, choose-your-own-family, financially insecure. But without the effort to build the relationships required of a radically welcoming culture, they come to First UU a time or two and don't come back. If you have felt or know an instance of anti-Christian bias at First UU, can you reframe your view of trans culture when you learn that trans culture is marked by deep spirituality? We know we've turned away Christians. Have our trans friends been dismissed in a similar way? You will not complete this Transforming Hearts course feeling dejected. You will come away with strategies to move those without power to the center of the circle where power resides. You will complete the course with an understanding that it's possible to be a radically welcoming church, and you'll be excited to be a part of it.
Thank you all for sharing. For more information on how you can participate in the Trans Inclusion in Congregations program, either go to our website or read this week's What's Up. Our interlude is All of Us Are Loved, performed by Emily McKinney and Eva Rebold.